Well, hey everybody, it's Thomas here. Hope you guys are having a good day so far and a good week. It's May 21st at the time of recording this, and the NHL and NHLPA has basically released what they're working on right now, and that is a 24-team conference-based playoff format. So instead of the 16 teams, it'd be 24 teams. So they'd be expanding the format a little bit more to keep it running a little bit longer and make up for teams that missed out on the playoffs to play this year. Now, what's going to happen is that they're going to have what they're calling a play-in series, which is basically a best-of-5 series where teams that were either just out of a playoff spot or were in a wild card spot have to play their way into the first round of the playoffs. So basically, they're kind of doing what the MLB does with their wild card. The wild card will basically play, one game in the MLB and then make their way into the first round. But this is a little bit different for the NHL. They're basically going to have a non-existent first round series, which is going to be best of 5, and then go to the regular playoff format as the rest of the playoffs would be best of 7. So it's kind of like the MLB system, but instead it's going to be a 5-game wild card playoff. So it's not technically a playoff. It's called a play-in, but it basically works the same way that the MLB kind of does. So basically, the top 4 teams are going to be given byes into the playoffs. That would be Boston, Tampa, Washington, Philly in the East, and in the West would be St. Louis, Colorado, Vegas, and Dallas. So this is kind of how it would work out if this were to happen. Pittsburgh would play Montreal to play the 4th seed, Carolina and the Rangers against the 3rd seed, Islanders, Florida for the 2nd, Toronto, Columbus for the 1st, and basically the same thing in the Western Conference. It kind of makes sense. Now, it's not approved yet, obviously. It still needs to be approved by the players and by their teams. If it gets approved, then this is going to be the playoff format moving forward, and I don't think the season, or the regular season at least, would resume. It would just go straight into playoffs. Now, if you're wondering, well, how would that look on a playoff format? Well, this is how it would look. And it's definitely different from playoff formats that we've seen in the past. And I did use a bracket creator online to try and kind of, try and give a general idea of what these playoffs would look like. And you can see immediately here, there's already going to be some frustration just with how this is going to all work. So say if Pittsburgh were to play Montreal and Montreal took out Pittsburgh, they would have to play Philadelphia, and a top seed like Pittsburgh would be eliminated, even though they would have probably had a wild card spot, which is, obviously going to make a lot of people upset. The other series I want to talk about, this all looks fine and dandy, but when you look at one series in particular, if Toronto were to beat Columbus, they would have to play Boston in the first round. Yeah, seriously, they would have to play the Boston Bruins in the first round again. Now, as a Toronto fan, I've seen this team struggle in playoffs. It's pretty obvious it's been happening for a long time. And they haven't had much success against Boston in playoffs, let alone the regular season. This could really tick a lot of people off because Toronto still would have had a wildcard spot. They would have had to probably play Tampa or Boston, depending on where they would have finished. If they're going to play Boston in the first round, I don't know. I feel like the trend might continue. I honestly have no idea. But then you look at the rest of the playoff format moving forward, you think about the teams that are going to be given a bye into the playoffs. If they're going to be sitting for a week or two, there's a very good chance their first round opponents may very well run them over. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there is still technically a chance that it could happen because they'll be on a bye week. They'll be practicing while other teams are playing, and they might not be ready for it. And I just don't know how this is going to work. I really don't. And you look at the rest. In the East, you think about the lower ranked teams like Montreal, they can get screwed out of getting a pretty decent pick in the draft lottery or just the draft in general. I don't know how to feel if I were a Montreal fan if this were to happen. And then you look at the East or the Western Conference, excuse me, St. Louis having to play Calgary or Winnipeg. That's done. I can't help but think St. Louis would probably win that series regardless. And then you think about Edmonton and Chicago. Chicago, should they really be there? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, their season hasn't been that great. Let's be honest. One of their worst seasons in recent history, at least. If they were to knock out Edmonton, Oilers fans would just riot, because that's where one of the suggested neutral sites would be for the playoffs. And it just might not be that great of a look if Chicago were to take out Edmonton in the first round. And you go down the rest of the list, Colorado would have to play either Vancouver or Minnesota. And going off of recent playoff history with Colorado, Vancouver, I can't help but feel like the Avalanche are going to win that series because Colorado is really good this year. Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, beat Colorado the last time these two teams met in the playoffs. That would be an interesting series. I want to see Minnesota-Colorado. That is a rivalry that is so underrated and not seen enough of. I can't help but feel like this needs to be a thing. And then you go in the final bracket, Nashville, Arizona playing against Vegas. Yeah, fine. Makes sense. Imagine if Arizona were to play Vegas, that would just be an immediate squash. I can't help but think that would just be an immediate loss. And I mean, obviously with the Drew Doughty jersey in the back, obviously Los Angeles wouldn't make the playoffs because they're terrible this year, straight up terrible. And they're going to get one of the top picks in the draft this year. So, I mean, they don't really get affected by this. I mean, unless they change the draft lottery, which I don't really see happening. It would be ridiculous if that were to happen. Teams like Ottawa, Detroit, they're still going to get probably top picks, maybe top 3 picks if they're lucky enough. But for these other teams like Montreal and Chicago, you don't really get much of a chance at a decent draft pick. You might still get decent placement based off of points and whatnot, but still, like this expanded playoff format, yeah, it's going to get you into the playoffs, so you might have a chance. But what about your future moving forward and you don't get a decent enough first-round pick to really help you out? What do you do then? Because for Chicago, you got to think about Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. They're getting up there in age, and they're very close to retiring. Tampa, after the embarrassment you had last season, you better make this playoffs count, or else you're going to have John Cooper get fired. If John Cooper doesn't make it out of the first round, whether he plays the Islanders or the Panthers, if you don't make it out of the first round, you're fired. You're done. There's no debate about it. He needs to be fired if they don't make it out of the first round. Washington, you guys won a cup and you're still competing. There's a really good chance that they can move forward. Boston, what else can you say? They're good. They're freaking good. People thought they were not going to be this good this year because they lost to St. Louis and they were going to offload. That's not the case. They're good this year, and they have a very good chance of making it back to the final this year. For St. Louis, you're the defending champions, and you're still playing really well. You are having a really good season, and you're continuing to be on an upward trend compared to where you were at the Christmas break last year, where you were the worst team in the National Hockey League, and then you won a Stanley Cup, and now you're the first-place seed in the Western Conference. Good for you. You guys are really doing well. Dallas, it's been an interesting story for them. Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn trying to kind of lead the way. They've gone through a few changes, obviously, with their head coaching and whatnot, but they still have a really good chance of being one of the tough teams to beat in that Western Conference. Again, for Colorado, I already said they're gross. They have an amazing team. Matt Duchene, you think about Gabriel Landeskog, Cale Makar, like that team is really good. And moving forward, they could be a real dominant threat in the Western Conference. For Vegas, you have a very good chance of making the playoffs again. I mean, you're going to, regardless of the standings, unless they decide to finish the season, then do playoffs, which I think would maybe screw you out of a playoff spot if you guys were to just take a huge nosedive. But Vegas hasn't missed a playoff since they came in the National Hockey League. And you know what? That's really good for Vegas because that means that they continue to make money and put butts in the seats. That's really good for them. For the rest of the teams moving forward in this play-in series, yes, you're shrinking it down to a best of 5, but you're going to make the playoffs run an extra week or two, and you're going to have to either delay the next season or shorten the season. That's going to affect not only next season and this season, it's going to affect the draft moving forward. I don't know when the draft is going to happen. Does it happen, before playoffs start? Obviously not, because you have to finish the playoffs in order to, get your placement realistically. they're going to have to delay the draft. The season will either get delayed or it's going to be shortened. There's going to be a lot of outcome from this. I don't know what kind of outcome, but, if this does get approved unanimously by players and teams, then this is going to be the playoff format that we see this year. Who knows what's going to happen at this point? I mean, Elliot Friedman did a great job of breaking down the whole thing, and that's what basically created this entire playoff bracket, which I think looks very different, but it could potentially work out for the National Hockey League. It also could much not work out. If it is successful, there's a chance that the NHL could adopt this kind of playoff format next season, which would mean would other professional hockey, minor hockey, or even junior hockey leagues adopt this playoff format if they have a big enough league to do this. I feel like the American Hockey League can very much do this. I don't think, the OHL and WHL can do this. They might have like a wild card system, but they can't do a 2014 playoff format because they don't have more than 20 teams, at least in the Ontario Hockey League, they don't. So if this works for the NHL, there's a good chance that this playoff format could stick around. It depends how the players react, how the teams react, and most importantly, how the fans react. Some people don't take the fans into account, but they are what matters most. Do they play in an empty arena? There's a very good chance of that. Do they play in front of fans? There's still a chance. Maybe in Canada, but in the United States, the United States is a rough scene right now. I'm sorry to break the news, but the United States is not in good shape. That's why they want to have a neutral site be in Edmonton or even Toronto for that matter. And that would make the memes just ridiculous. If the Stanley Cup was awarded in Toronto, the memes would be endless. Nonetheless, this is what the playoff format could very much potentially look like. And whether it moves forward or not, I think it's a pretty good it's a good pitch from the National Hockey League. It's fair to the teams that will just miss the playoffs by like a point or two. But then you have to, again, take your draft lottery into account and where these teams would rank in terms of picks. Because if I'm not mistaken, Chicago is having a worse season than Montreal. It could be reversed. I'm not sure. But still, moving forward, this is going to be either a huge win or a big loss for the NHL. They can't risk surrendering the season. So I feel like this is going to be the move going forward, that they're going to do this expanded playoff format. Is it etched in stone? Obviously not. But we'll have to wait and see. I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on this whole thing because it's a really interesting scenario of how this is potentially going to work out. Are you a fan of this moving forward? Do you think this could potentially work for the National Hockey League? Let me know what you think in the comments. And yeah, let's try and spark a conversation about this. Do you think this is going to work for the NHL, or do you think that this could potentially ruin the playoffs for you? Let me know down in the comments what you think. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this little breakdown, and hopefully we can have some hockey soon. Anyway, thanks for watching this. I really appreciate it. And until next time, take care.